Let's be honest, dating someone with an avoidant attachment style can feel like you're always chasing a ghost. 1 minute they're in, the next they're out. You start questioning yourself, blaming yourself, and walking on eggshells just to keep the peace. But there are moments, specific things they say, that should be taken as red flags, not riddles. And if you hear these phrases, it's not a cue to work harder. It's a cue to walk away. When someone you're dating tells you they never asked you to care so much, it's not just a casual comment. It's a powerful signal about how they view emotional responsibility in a relationship. This statement doesn't just dismiss your feelings, it reframes your emotional investment as something excessive, misplaced, or even problematic. And that has long-term consequences for how you show up in the relationship going forward. Let's break down what's really being said when they throw that line at you. They're telling you that your care, your consistency, your effort, it's not welcome unless it fits within their tightly controlled boundaries. This isn't someone who's overwhelmed and trying to articulate their emotional bandwidth. This is someone pushing the responsibility for connection entirely onto your shoulders while they remain at a safe, emotionally distant place. It's the kind of line that turns your genuine affection into an accusation, making you question whether you've done something wrong by simply showing up with an open heart. What they're really communicating is that they want the benefits of your presence without the discomfort of emotional accountability. Your texts, your check-ins, your efforts to understand their moods and meet their needs, they're fine with it as long as it doesn't make them feel vulnerable, or as long as they're in control of the pace. The moment your care begins to shine a light on their avoidance or emotional unavailability, they twist it into a liability. You suddenly become the one who's too much, the one who's overstepping, even though all you're doing is what anyone in a healthy relationship should do: invest. This is where many people fall into a dangerous trap. Instead of questioning why their partner is so resistant to care, they start questioning their own worth. You think maybe you came on too strong, maybe you're overthinking things, maybe next time you shouldn't text first, maybe you should hold back a little more, and suddenly you're not in a relationship, you're in a performance. You're no longer showing up as yourself, you're showing up as the version of you that you think is palatable to someone who's emotionally withholding. Over time, this erodes your self-esteem. It makes you feel like love has to be earned by shrinking yourself. You begin associating closeness with risk because every time you try to get emotionally close, it's met with distance or deflection. And even worse, this can condition you to suppress your own needs. You become hypersensitive to what might push them away instead of being tuned into what actually nourishes you emotionally. The relationship turns into a constant balancing act, trying to give enough to keep them engaged, but not so much that they feel smothered. This is not how secure, healthy connections work. In a real relationship, care is not something you need permission to give. It's a mutual exchange, where two people make each other feel safe to invest, to express, and to grow together. But when someone tells you they never asked for your care, they are drawing a line that says, "You're on your own here." They're making it clear that they don't want to feel responsible for your emotional experience. And without that shared responsibility, there's no partnership, only proximity. They may be physically close, they may show up sometimes, but emotionally, they're not with you. They're in self-protection mode, keeping the door cracked just enough to get their needs met without ever letting you all the way in. It's subtle emotional sabotage dressed up as honesty. It's not a dialogue about boundaries or emotional pace. It's a declaration that their comfort will always come before your emotional safety. And once that dynamic is established, the more you care, the more you'll be made to feel like you're doing something wrong. When someone says you're too emotional, it may sound like a passing remark, but it's far more insidious than it appears on the surface. It's one of those phrases that seems like feedback, but is actually a form of emotional dismissal. It's not a conversation opener, it's a conversation ender. It doesn't invite understanding, it shuts it down. And if you're not careful, you'll internalize it. You'll start to wonder whether your feelings are actually a problem, whether your emotional needs are unreasonable, or whether you're simply wired wrong for relationships. What's happening in that moment is a form of emotional gaslighting. You're being told that your feelings, your hurt, your frustration, your vulnerability aren't valid. Not because the situation didn't justify them, but because they make someone else uncomfortable. You might have brought something up that mattered to you, something that felt off, or something you needed reassurance about. And instead of meeting you with curiosity or care, they labeled you too emotional. That's code for, I don't want to deal with the reality of your experience, or worse, your emotional response is inconvenient for me. And instead of acknowledging that they may be triggering something in you or failing to meet your needs, they use that label to shift the spotlight away from their actions and onto your reaction. This creates a power imbalance in the relationship. One person becomes the emotional judge while the other becomes the defendant. You end up defending your tone, your timing, your tears, your concerns, until you're no longer even talking about the issue that hurt you. You're talking about how you should have reacted to it. And the original problem goes unresolved, buried under layers of shame and second guessing. You begin to feel like you're walking a tightrope in the relationship, constantly monitoring your own emotions to avoid being seen as dramatic, needy, or unstable. This emotional self-censorship starts small but grows fast. Before long, you're no longer expressing yourself fully. You're bottling things up, downplaying your needs, and telling yourself you're fine when you're not, just to maintain peace, just to avoid that familiar judgment. The irony is that avoidant partners often provoke emotional reactions through their inconsistency, their distance, or their inability to communicate in ways that foster connection. They can be hot and cold, present one moment and aloof the next, giving you just enough to keep you around, but never enough to make you feel secure. That emotional roller coaster naturally leads to anxiety, and when you finally express how the dynamic is affecting you, they hold up your reaction as the problem. But your feelings didn't come out of nowhere. They're a response to a pattern, they're data, and they deserve to be heard, not minimized. It's also important to understand what kind of partner says this. Someone who says you're too emotional often hasn't built the emotional muscles needed for vulnerability. They don't know how to sit with discomfort. They don't know how to hold space for someone else's experience without feeling like they're being attacked. So instead of engaging, they deflect. They make your emotions your problem, not something that's worth leaning into or learning from. And over time, this turns the relationship into a place where you can't bring your whole self. You end up filtering everything you say, not just to protect yourself from criticism, but to protect the relationship from breaking under the weight of real conversation. This kind of dynamic is subtle, which makes it especially dangerous. It doesn't come with shouting matches or outright cruelty. It often comes in calm tones, delivered in the middle of what seems like a rational discussion. That's why it gets under your skin. That's why it lodges itself in your self-perception. Because you think, maybe they're right. Maybe I do feel things too deeply. Maybe I do overreact. And in that doubt, you start to make yourself smaller, more digestible, more chill. But in doing so, you also become less honest, less fulfilled, and less seen. The deeper danger is that over time, being told you're too emotional makes you forget that your sensitivity is not a weakness. It's a strength. It's the part of you that allows for empathy, connection, and real intimacy. And in the right relationship, your emotional depth would not only be accepted, it would be appreciated, nurtured, and valued. When someone says they just need space, again, it's easy to rationalize it. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe they've had a hard week, or they're dealing with things they haven't told you about. You start to give them the benefit of the doubt, assuming that this need for space is temporary, that it's healthy, even admirable. After all, we've all heard that healthy relationships involve balance, time together, time apart. But this isn't about healthy space. This is about emotional distancing disguised as self-care. And when it becomes a recurring pattern, it's no longer space, it's avoidance. This phrase often shows up after a moment of emotional closeness. You've had a great weekend together. Maybe you opened up about something vulnerable, or you asked for clarity about the relationship. And just when you think things are deepening, they pull back. They suddenly feel suffocated. They say they need room to breathe, and you're left confused, wondering how intimacy became too much so quickly. You go over the interaction again and again, questioning whether you said too much, whether you asked for too much, whether your timing was off. But it wasn't your timing. It was their threshold for emotional connection. Avoidant partners often reach for the word space, not as a way to reset, but as a way to retreat. It becomes a tool to manage their discomfort with vulnerability. When closeness starts to feel threatening, they don't engage with it, they withdraw from it. And if you're not careful, this withdrawal becomes the defining rhythm of the relationship. You get moments of connection followed by long stretches of silence. You get highs that feel amazing, followed by lows that leave you anxious and unsure. And every time they reappear, you feel relieved, not because things are good, but because things aren't broken, at least not yet. That cycle of withdrawal and return creates emotional instability, and instability is exhausting. Over time, you begin to recalibrate your own needs to accommodate their avoidance. You don't bring things up when they bother you because you're afraid it will trigger another request for space. You hold back your excitement when things go well because you know it might spook them. You stop asking questions that matter. Where is this going? What do you want? How do you feel? Because every time you try, you get met with ambiguity or distance. You start operating on their timeline, not because it works for you, but because it's the only way to keep them around. And while you're adjusting, compromising, and self-editing, they're maintaining their comfort zone, untouched and unchallenged. This dynamic doesn't just hurt your relationship, it hurts your sense of self. You begin to mistake silence for peace and detachment for maturity. You start thinking that real connection must come with sacrifice, and that the price of love is learning to be okay with less. But deep down, you're not okay with it. You're hungry for consistency, for emotional safety, for reciprocity. You want to be with someone who doesn't need to take a step back every time things start moving forward. But when "I just need space" becomes the recurring theme, you're not in a relationship that's growing. You're in one that's pausing itself over and over again until all the momentum is gone. There's also a deeper message hidden in that repeated request for space. What they're saying isn't just "I need time alone." What they're really communicating is "I don't want to engage with the emotional part of this." That can mean they don't want to confront their own fears, their own doubts, or the responsibility of considering your feelings alongside theirs. And rather than doing the inner work, they remove themselves from the situation entirely. This leaves you holding all the weight, your emotions, their withdrawal, and the growing gap between you. What's tricky is that they may come back. They may return with charm, with softness, even with affection. They might not be cruel. They might not be volatile. They might simply be inconsistent. And that makes it harder to walk away because you hold on to the good moments like proof that the relationship can still work. But inconsistency is not affection. Unpredictability is not passion. And when someone uses space as a pattern of escape rather than reflection, what they're showing you is their threshold for intimacy. And that threshold has nothing to do with your worth. When someone tells you that commitment isn't really their thing, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking they just haven't met the right person yet. And if you're already emotionally invested, that person feels like it could be you. You start believing that maybe, with time and patience, they'll come around. That their fear of commitment is just a phase, a protective layer built from past hurt or relationships that went wrong. And so you stay, you give more, wait longer, and hope harder, all while ignoring the reality of what they've just told you. Because buried in that simple statement is a truth many people don't want to face. When someone tells you they don't do commitment, they're laying down the foundation of a relationship on which they will never fully build. At first, it may sound like honesty. It might even feel refreshing that they're not pretending to be someone they're not. They're upfront, they're clear, and they're not playing games. But as the relationship progresses, that same honesty turns into a limitation. It becomes a wall you can't get past, a ceiling you keep hitting your head against. You start noticing that whenever the relationship could take a deeper step, whether it's defining the relationship, meeting important people in each other's lives, or making future plans, they freeze, they pull back. They throw out phrases like, "I don't want to rush anything," or "let's just see where this goes," or "I don't like labels." And every time you try to understand where things stand, it feels like you're being told to calm down, to stop complicating things, to just enjoy the moment. The problem is, moments aren't enough when your heart is in it. If you're someone who values stability, growth, and emotional partnership, then loving someone who avoids commitment is like building a house on quicksand. You can put in the effort, the attention, and the time, but nothing stays. Nothing takes root. And yet you keep trying because they're not cold or unkind. They might be affectionate. They might say they care. They might even talk about how they've never connected with someone like this before. But all of that makes it even more confusing because if the connection is real, why won't they commit? The truth is, it's not about the strength of the connection. It's about their relationship with vulnerability. Commitment isn't just about titles or timelines. It's about allowing someone into your emotional world and being willing to stay when it gets uncomfortable. And for someone with avoidant tendencies, commitment represents a threat to their autonomy, their emotional safety, or their sense of control. So even when they feel drawn to someone, their instinct is to protect themselves, not to build with someone else. They keep you at a distance just close enough that you won't leave, but far enough that they don't have to change. And this imbalance begins to wear you down. You start questioning yourself. You wonder if you're being too demanding, too pushy, or if maybe you should be more laid back. You convince yourself that the connection is more important than the label, that time will work things out, that love will eventually conquer whatever fear they're holding on to. But what actually happens is that your needs get smaller and smaller. You stop bringing up the future. You stop asking questions. You learn to live in emotional limbo, where every day you're unsure whether this will last or fade. And even though you're technically in a relationship, you never feel fully chosen. There's also the danger of comparison. You may start seeing other couples making plans, building lives, or just being emotionally present for one another, and you'll feel the ache of what you're missing. But instead of acknowledging it, you push it down. Because saying it out loud would mean facing the fact that your relationship doesn't have the foundation you hoped it would. And that's a painful realization when your heart is still invested. But the more you deny that reality, the more you become attached to potential instead of presence. You begin loving what the relationship could be instead of what it actually is. You tell yourself that things will change, that they'll see your worth, that they'll grow out of their fear of commitment and step up. But that's not a relationship. It's a waiting room, and you're stuck in it, hoping someone will walk through a door they've already told you they don't want to open. When someone asks you why you always need reassurance, it's rarely a genuine question. It's usually framed with judgment, with a hint of irritation, or with a tone that suggests your emotional needs are somehow excessive or unreasonable. It's not asked to understand you. It's asked to silence you. In that moment, they're not listening to the root of what you're trying to express. They're reacting to the discomfort your vulnerability stirs in them. And instead of leaning in with empathy, they put the spotlight back on you, making you feel like your need for connection is a flaw to be fixed, rather than a basic human requirement in any emotionally safe relationship. Reassurance is not a weakness. It's not a sign that you're insecure or needy. It's what we all need at different points in a relationship, especially when we care deeply. It's the way we ask, are we still good? Do you still choose me? Can I trust that this thing we're building has a foundation I can relax into? When a relationship has uncertainty, when someone is inconsistent, emotionally distant, or avoidant, it's natural for you to look for reassurance. Not because you're trying to control them, but because you're trying to find your footing in something that keeps shifting beneath you. What makes it especially painful is that the people who most often criticize your need for reassurance are the ones who created the emotional instability in the first place. It's their unpredictability, their hot and cold behavior, their refusal to define the relationship, their emotional unavailability that plants the seeds of anxiety in you. Then, when you seek comfort or clarity, you're made to feel guilty for having the very emotions their behavior caused. It's like someone shaking the ground beneath your feet and then criticizing you for losing your balance. It's not fair. And more than that, it's not healthy. Over time, this kind of response conditions you to keep your needs hidden. You begin to believe that asking for closeness, for words of affirmation, for emotional support will drive them away. So you learn to self-soothe in silence. You stop voicing your fears. You pretend you're fine when you're not. You hold back your concerns, telling yourself you're just being overly sensitive or dramatic. You internalize the idea that needing reassurance is something you should outgrow, something strong people don't need. And so you suffer in silence, trying to become the version of yourself that won't upset them, won't overwhelm them, won't trigger their discomfort. But while you're working so hard to appear low maintenance, you start to lose your sense of emotional safety. You're never fully relaxed. You're always reading between the lines, decoding their texts, analyzing their tone, trying to figure out if you said something wrong. Your nervous system is constantly in alert mode, trying to anticipate their next shift in mood or distance. And this state of anxiety becomes your new normal, not because that's who you are, but because that's who you've had to become in order to survive a connection that doesn't give you the emotional security you deserve. This dynamic creates a dangerous loop. The more you suppress your need for reassurance, the more disconnected you feel. And the more disconnected you feel, the more you crave reassurance. But because you've been trained to believe that asking for it is wrong, you hold it in, or you find small, indirect ways of testing the waters, becoming passive-aggressive, withdrawing, waiting for them to notice you're upset. But they rarely do. And when they do, it's framed as you being emotional again, or always needing something. It becomes a cycle of unmet needs and misplaced guilt. You feel bad for wanting closeness, and they feel inconvenienced for being expected to provide it. At its core, the phrase, "Why do you always need reassurance?" is a reflection of emotional immaturity. It's said by someone who doesn't yet understand that relationships require maintenance, not just attraction. That love isn't just a feeling, it's an action, repeated over time. Reassurance isn't about insecurity. It's about connection. It's about choosing to meet your partner where they are and reminding them that they are safe, seen, and valued. And someone who makes you feel like your emotional needs are burdensome isn't building a relationship with you. They're asking you to manage one with yourself while they stand at a distance. When someone says, "This is just who I am, take it or leave it," it might sound like self-awareness, but more often than not, it's a declaration of emotional resignation. It's not about being honest with you, it's about avoiding growth. It's the kind of phrase that shuts down conversations before they even begin. It creates a barrier to intimacy by sending the message that they are unwilling to reflect, unwilling to compromise, and unwilling to adapt, no matter how their behavior affects you or the relationship. It's not confidence, it's convenience. That kind of mindset becomes especially toxic in relationships because relationships, by their very nature, require evolution. No two people come together perfectly aligned in every value, every habit, every emotional response. What makes a relationship strong is the willingness of two people to adjust, to understand each other, and to grow not only together, but because of each other. When someone uses the phrase, "This is just who I am," what they're really doing is drawing a hard boundary around their comfort zone. They're saying, "I'm not going to stretch myself for you. I'm not going to consider how my patterns or my tone or my avoidance might be hurting you." And instead of working with you, they make you feel like the one with unreasonable expectations simply for asking for change. What makes this particularly dangerous is that it often comes after you've voiced something vulnerable. Maybe you've pointed out a behavior that makes you feel small, or you've expressed a need that isn't being met, or you've asked for more presence or clarity. And instead of engaging in that moment, instead of leaning in with curiosity or compassion, they throw this wall up. They tell you that who they are is fixed, as if evolution is off the table. And what that leaves you with is a choice that isn't a choice at all, accept the bare minimum or walk away. But you're already emotionally attached. So you convince yourself to stay. You rationalize that maybe your expectations are too high. Maybe you're asking for too much. Maybe you should just learn to accept them as they are. And so begins the slow erosion of your standards. You start editing yourself to fit their limitations. You lower your voice when you want to speak up. You settle for half effort because full effort is apparently off-brand for them. You begin to shrink, to compromise not for the sake of mutual growth, but to avoid friction. And what's worse is that you begin to believe that love means putting up with someone's inability to meet you halfway. You wear patience like a badge of honor, hoping that your consistency will somehow inspire theirs. But what actually happens is that the relationship begins to orbit entirely around their boundaries, their preferences, their pace, and their resistance. What's also frustrating about this mindset is that it's often used selectively. The same person who says "this is just who I am at home" will learn how to adapt at work, with friends, or in other social contexts where they're incentivized to grow. They know how to be flexible when it benefits them, but in a relationship where the stakes are emotional, they refuse to do the same. That tells you it's not about ability, it's about willingness. And that's a critical distinction. Because the problem isn't that they can't change. The problem is that they don't see the value in doing so for the sake of the relationship. This phrase also creates a false sense of self. It treats personality as permanent and accountability as optional. But who we are is not just what comes naturally. It's what we choose to become through conscious effort. It's how we show up for the people we care about. It's what we do when our instincts clash with someone else's needs. To say take it or leave it is to say I will not evolve no matter how this makes you feel. And when someone says that, what they're asking is for you to carry the emotional weight of the relationship alone. You start doing the compromising for both of you. You start rationalizing things you shouldn't have to. You make excuses for them when their actions don't match their words. And slowly, the relationship becomes a place where your needs go unheard and their patterns go unquestioned. It stops being about mutual care and becomes about emotional survival, trying to keep things going without making them uncomfortable. You may still love them, but love without movement, love without mutual investment, starts to feel more like endurance than connection.